Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English Podcast Zone USA. We spoke today about decoding body language, overcoming awkwardness, and putting your best foot forward. So, Vanessa, tell me about my posture and seating in this to begin. You're an expert in nonverbal communication, so size me up. Well, first of all, I love that we're angled towards each other. I have a little bit of a pet peeve when people are angled half away. Have you ever seen that where they have the setup where they're angled away? The brain loves when we're on parallel lines. So I love that even through a camera. Also, a distance that most people don't think about is the distance between our ears and our shoulders. It's my favorite distance. The reason for that is because when we're anxious, when we're afraid, we tend to take up as little space as possible. You'll see people will turtle where they sink their head down, and they tend to creep their shoulder. Exactly. They tend to creep their shoulders up. It's a cue that we don't think about. In fact, we often do it in first impressions. We say, "Hey, nice to see you." Right? Right? Compressed like that. Yeah, you see people standing up sometimes when they do that. They'll go, "Hi," and they use that uplift. Is that what it's called? Up talk. Up talk. Yeah. So there's this trifecta of, I would say, awkwardness that can happen in a first impression, and they all are related to each, I would say. Awkwardness that can happen in a first impression, and they all are related to each other. First, we're a little nervous in that first impression, and so we take up as little space as possible. We turtle down, we shrink up. That immediately shortens my vocal power, right? It has less oxygen. I have more tension in my neck. I also tend to clench my jaw, which then creates a little bit less volume, which then makes me sound nervous, and then creates a little bit less volume, which then makes me sound nervous. And then I use, as you said, up talk. So good morning. So happy to be here. And what the brain does when it hears an accidental question inflection, it's called a question inflection. So my name is Vanessa. I'm here to talk about body language. When you hear me accidentally use a question flexion, your brain goes from listening to scrutinizing. The reason for this is because liars often accidentally use the question flexion because they're asking, "Do you believe this?" So if I say to my daughter, "Did you take the cookie from the cookie jar?" And she goes, "No." Right. That movement, it's subconsciously, even if you're not lying, it triggers the part of our brain that goes, "Oh, something's off here." And we don't like to hear people who are questioning themselves because we don't want to feel that we're questioning. And so I think that trifecta in that first impression, and you did it beautifully, maximizing this distance. That's the most important. Second, I can see space between your torso and your arm right now. And that is a very subtle signal of you're comfortable enough that you're not trying to block or protect your torso. Anytime we're tight to the side, or tight exactly, we're tight to the side, that signals I feel a little bit of discomfort that I want to protect my vital organs, even if we're just cold. And so what I say to people is you could be doing this because you're actually nervous, but you could be doing it at a bad habit. And a lot of our nonverbal pet peeves are bad habits, or because you're cold, or because you're allergic. It doesn't matter your reason. All that matters is the people who are watching you. They're making a very quick impression of you. And it often happens, I'm sad to say, in less than a second. I'm quickly seeing, are we aligned? He's taking space here. I see space. He's not protective. Oh, and we see a lot of vocal flexibility in that very first word. And our vertical first impression usually happens on hello. So that up talk, I see a lot of people doing that, and it seems to me that that's a sign of appeal to authority. That's a sign of deference. It's also a way of signaling harmlessness because children use up talk a lot. What it indicates to me when I see someone doing that is it's either a prolongation of immaturity or it can be manipulative. right? To, to mask yourself in a way that, so you appear much more harmless than you actually are. Or, I suppose it's a way of also forestalling aggression. Because if you signal that you're immature, then what you're doing is you're asking for support from other people. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I see any kind of negative nonverbal cue, and cues are all contextual. Let's use uptalk as an example. There are actually two factors. There's external and internal. External is exactly what you just mentioned. Maybe you're trying to show deference. Maybe you're trying to show submissiveness, right? You'll often have people who they're asking permission or they're trying to show, I'm not a threat to you. Those are external reasons. You also might have external reasons that someone makes you very anxious or nervous, and so you're with a boss or you're in a negotiation. I hear uptalk a lot in sales contexts where someone asks their price. So they're on the phone and they say, you know, we'd love to work with you and the price of this service is $5,000. And what they did there is they are internally thinking, I'm not sure about this number, and neither should you. Or are you going to say yes to this number? I'm worried you won't. And so that gives away your vocal competence because you're saying to this person, there is room to negotiate here. Or we ask a boundary because we're nervous about the external source. The internal reasons, though, and this is, I think, where it gets more interesting, is if you don't feel worthy, if you have self-doubt, if you feel like you don't belong, or you have imposter syndrome, which so many people do, you use uptalk regardless of the outside. And so you go into a presentation or a meeting or a date or an interview, and you ask your name, you ask your value, you ask your salary, you ask your answer, and people go, I can't trust this person. But it actually has. It's not being deceptive. They're literally just so anxious they cannot deliver with vocal confidence. Do you think that assessing the situation that way, so people are going to make their assessments based on those nonverbal cues, hypothetically, the assessments evolved and have functioned just like the behavioral demonstrations? And so, one of the things that I was considering when I was reading cues, Master the Secret Language of Charismatic Communication. I was curious. You lay things out very explicitly, and it's hard for people to learn to change their behavior as a consequence of mere explicit instruction too. But why would we presume that there's actually a gap that needs to be closed between how someone is presenting themselves and the inference? Like, why shouldn't I just assume that if someone is adopting a preposition, prey, pray, and they're indicating anxiety and they're using uptalk, why shouldn't I indicate? Why shouldn't I conclude that what that nonverbal behavior is telling me is actually correct? Now you talked a little bit about bad habits, and that maybe that's part of the answer. So yes, this is such a great question. Bad habits is one, but I actually have a bigger one. And this is, I think, the reason why I wrote this book. Most people have very, very good ideas. They're very well prepared. They have a lot of competence or book smarts, and they have no idea how to share that. So their competence is there. Their ideas are very good. But when they get in the room, they have social anxiety. They have awkwardness if they're not sure how to read cues. And so the prey behavior, the uptalk, the bad nonverbal habits come into play because they are anxious about their presence, but not their ideas. So what makes me angry is when you have someone who has a brilliant idea, a great presentation, they'd be a great hire in an interview, but they show up and they have no idea how to answer the questions. Even though their competence is there, they're so nervous about their presence, they can't show it. Okay, so your primary target, let's say, is people who subvert themselves unconsciously and portray themselves as less competent than they actually are. And so that would be likely associated with high trait neuroticism, why favorite personality trait. If you look at what predicts success, this is something else I wanted to talk to you about. You talked about warmth and competence. And the best marker on the personality side for competence is conscientiousness. But warmth is more ambiguous, I would say. And so we should delve into that, because the literature that I read on management styles suggested that, or management personality suggested generally, that less agreeable managers are more effective. Now it's a hard thing to parse apart, because that immature self-presentation you described, that could be a consequence of neuroticism, but it could also be a consequence of agreeableness that's too high, right? And so, if you're agreeable, you don't want to come across as a threat. And so you can revert to behaviors that indicate that you're agreeable. You don't want to come across as a threat. And so you can revert to behaviors that indicate that you're harmless. Okay, and so all right. So we're going to talk about people who are undermining their own ability to progress forward because they lack. What do they lack? They lack social skill, or they're just unconscious of the way they're presenting themselves. It's a bad combination of, I call them high-achieving awkward folks, right? Like they really want to do well, very smart. So yes, it can be a lack of social skill. It also could be an overemphasis on IQ over PQ, where they were so focused for so long on developing test scores and book smarts and studying, and they focus a lot on the data. I work with a lot of engineers, very highly technical folks, and they're very, very hyper-focused on their numbers. But they get in the room, and they have no idea how to make eye contact. They have no idea. So that's a lack of knowledge. Whereas long as, if they're told, hey, here are the cues for warmth and competence. I only want you to try cues on that actually work for you. There are 97 different cues I've sort of identified, and there's some that work for people, and there's some that don't. Okay, you try on a couple of cues that work for you. Here's the recipe of warmth and competence. If you add those cues, people are more likely to believe your data. And this comes directly from the research. So, Dr. Susan Fiske is sort of the pioneer it's called stereotype content model, right? The warmth and competence model. And she said that competence without warmth is likely to leave us feeling suspicious. And suspicious, that is the killer. Because what happens is, someone gets in the room, they're hyper-focused on the numbers and the idea, which is great, but they get in the room, they think, my ideas will speak for themselves. I don't need to add warmth. And then they don't even know what warmth would be. So even when they get in the room and they can feel, oh, people are suspicious of me. They're asking me really hard questions. They're not making eye contact. They're not believing my slides. Then they're like, what do I do? What do I do? And so then it creates this horrible cycle of awkwardness where it gets even worse. Right. So people will note from the nonverbal behavior of the audience members that they're not being attended to, right? So they lose the audience. So let me tell you some things that I do when I'm lecturing, and you can comment on them if you would. So I never use notes. So, and my sense of that is that if you have to use notes, then you actually don't know what you're talking about. And then someone might say, well, I have to discuss some very complicated material that I haven't fully mastered, and so I need the details of the notes, and my response to that usually is pitch at the level that you're able to. Right. And so then I also try to remember before I go on stage that I'm happy to be there and that I'm pleased that the audience is there. So I'm making a real effort not to regard them as adversaries or judgmental adversaries, because I believe that people can tell if that's your assumption pretty much the moment that you walk on stage. Your nonverbal cues indicate fear of the audience. And then the audience is wondering what the hell you're doing there if you're afraid of them. And then I also make eye contact with people continually when I'm speaking. so I'm never or seldomly speaking to the crowd. It's one person at a time with eye contact. And the advantage to that is that you can tell by watching the person that you're making eye contact with whether they're receiving the message. There's also a chemical component there that's going to help any presenter, which is, we talk about warmth. What does warmth mean? It's one of the harder ones. I agree. Competence tied to conscientiousness. Yes. Warmth is hard because it's tied to, chemically speaking, oxytocin. Now, we know oxytocin is very complicated. It does a lot of things in our bodies, but the way that we produce it socially is two major ways. Touch, so handshake, high five, fist bump, or eye contact. In fact, research even shows that you and I can make oxytocin even through a webcam, as long as I can see your face and you can see mine. So when you get on stage and you're trying to very quickly build trust, your competence is there. You're going to speak without notes. Great. The way that you physiologically produce warmth is by trying to make eye contact with individual people in the audience. And I will add a little tip on top of yours because I agree with you. I make eye contact with my modders. If someone's in the audience. Oh yes, that's a good one. Yeah, I find. Yeah. You want to make eye contact with people that are paying attention, and I know I'm a recovering awkward person. Okay, I am the person that I try to help, which is a high-achieving awkward person. If I'm on stage and I sense negative doubt, someone who's not on my side, I can get in my own head, and then all of a sudden my nonverbals are off, my confidence is off. But if I find my nodders, I know I'm with people. They are with me, and so I make eye contact with them. It's a gift to them. I'm gifting them oxytocin. But more importantly, it's a gift to me. I get oxytocin, which makes me feel connected, belonging, and calm, right? Which I need on stage. So eye contact with individual people and your nodders is extremely important. The second thing that you mentioned one of the things you mentioned was not having notes. So I'm going to add a nuance here that I very much agree that your notes are distracting for the audience, right? If you're shuffling around flashcards or you're trying to look at notes in your podium, the audience is going to wonder, well, where's their competence? Why don't they know this so well they can deliver it to me? I would add, though, it's really important to reduce your audience's cognitive load. I think just like you, I'm presenting some very complex topics. I'm going very fast on stage. I know that if I'm just delivering to them with one mode, verbal, they're having to take that all in just by listening. So I will sometimes have notes for myself, but also really for the audience with visuals or bullets behind me. So my slides are kind of my notes in terms of how I want to pace myself, but also I'm lowering listeners' cognitive load by saying, hey, warmth and competence is 82% of your impressions. And then behind me, I have a giant slide that says 82% of our impressions are warmth and competence. That does two things. Point one, if heaven forbid, I forgot the number because I got nervous, it would be behind me, but I know it. But more importantly, they see that with a visual of how much that is in a pie chart, and it doubles up the layer of understanding. The other thing I'll note here if we're talking about cognitive load is the importance of hand gestures. I think as a presenter, and I don't know how much you think about this on stage, I think it's important that Dr. Susan Goldwyn Meadow is the researcher behind this, that the more gestures you add, especially if they're explanatory gestures, the more information is conveyed. So if I say to you, Jordan, I have 5. I have 3 different ideas and I hold up 5. It's even hard to misalign them. And I hold up 5, but I say I have 3. Your brain is like, no, Vanessa, it's 5. You're actually more likely to believe my gesture over my words. Or if I were to say, Today I have a really big idea, and I hold up like I'm holding a little penny. Your brain kind of goes, no, it's a small idea. It looks so small. So if you can demonstrate concept, phase 1, phase 2, we have 3 different things. That's like giving notes to the audience. And so I think that notes is an interesting. You can be playful with it, with visual notes, but also even gesture notes. So I tend to gesture a lot when I'm lecturing and I get parroted for that, which is fine, but I'm bringing that up because it indicates that it's noticeable. Now you said that you're a recovering, awkward person, but you gesture quite a lot. And so how much of the persona that you have did you develop consciously? Yes. I mean, you come across. Let me see. You come across your, how would I say? Well, your shoulders are back. So that's relevant to that concept of fronting it you described. So you're not closed off. You're very attentive in terms of eye contact, and you use a lot of nonverbal gestures. Now, my suspicions are that that would be rare among someone who's awkward. And so, how did you? Would you say that you learned to let yourself use hand gestures? Or did you learn? Did you actually practice? How much of the way that you're presenting yourself, would you say, is a consequence of actually practice? How much of the way that you're presenting yourself would you say is a consequence of conscious practice? You know, awkwardness shows up a lot of different ways, and this is one of my favorite topics. The stereotype about awkwardness is still less gesture, less attentiveness, lack of eye contact. But that's only one way that awkwardness or even social fear shows up. There's also awkwardness or even social fear shows up. There's also awkwardness in bigger, more gestures, over-the-top gestures. And in fact, that's where I skew. So I skew quite high on the gestures. In fact, in nonverbal, I like to say there's always too much of a good thing. So I love a gesture, but if I had hand gestures for every single word, it would be interpretive dance. I love nodding, but I actually nod too much. I'm an overnodded. So I skew very high on eye contact gestures, movement nodding. So I've had to just dial down a little bit. So it's always when people work with me, I'm like, okay, we've got to figure out where are you? Are you on the low end where we have to dial up to your comfort level, but we have to add a little more gesture? Are you too high? So when I was, for example, let's take nodding. Nodding in Western cultures, actually most cultures except Bulgaria, India, and Pakistan, this vertical nod is a yes and a horizontal nod is a no. So we recognize this in those cultures as being affirmative or agreeing. Also, the research shows that if I triple nod while you're speaking, you're likely to speak 67% longer. So if I want you to open up and I go, hom, 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 that tells you I'm here, tell me more. But if I'm in conversation with you and the entire time I'm, uh-huh, 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 it actually takes away my competence. It makes me look like I am too agreeable or people pleaser. So I've had to replace the nod with a head tilt because it's physically impossible to do both at once. So I had some awkward moments there where I was like, I have to nod less, even, especially if I don't agree with someone. So what was happening for me on a personal note is I was over nodding. I was over gesturing. I had too much movement and it was distracting. And I didn't even agree with folks. I was just so nervous about being liked. I so wanted to be liked that, you know, I would, yes, Jordan, please like me. You know, I would be nodding to you. And I realized that was not serving me because it actually made me look too trusting, too open. And so what you see in front of you is me with calm gestures and calm nodding. I also try really hard to not fake a cue because I think that you can't fake it. I think that people pick up on it. They are inauthentic. So if I don't actually like something, I will not smile. As a recovering awkward person, I would smile by default all the time because I wanted people to like me. So the other way awkwardness dresses up is that sort of fake smile. Huh, do you like me? And we read that as inauthentic. And so I have also, if I have the tendency, even with you, to smile for you. Like I want to smile and say this is good, but if I'm like, nope, I only smile if I actually feel excited about an answer or if I actually feel excited about something. So awkwardness kind of dresses up in two different extremes. Right. So that triple nod, that seems to me something like I get it, then I think about it, then I agree. Maybe that's the signaling of the trifecta. Well, I like it. I never thought about that before. Maybe it's, I hear you, right? Like that acknowledgement. Yes. And yeah. And then you're internalizing it. Ah, yes, I agree with that. Yeah. And then it's, I hear you. Right. Like that acknowledgement. Yes. And yeah. And then you're re-internalizing it. Ah, yes, I agree with that. Yeah. And then it's like, keep going. Oh, yeah. And you're signaling it. And then, by the way, look at the difference. So nonverbal is so interesting. A slow triple nod, interest, curiosity, engagement, a fast triple nod, impatience. So watch the difference. So we go, tell me more versus Yeah, get on with it, right? That's an indication to mimic my speed and to move more rapidly towards your goal, right? To be the same as this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's smiling too. That is a proclivity of women more. If you look at men and women are approximately equal in extroversion, but you can break extroversion down into assertiveness and enthusiasm. Outgoing, yeah. Enthusiasm, yeah. And women score higher on enthusiasm. So they're signaling more positive emotion as a general rule. And so they'll smile more as well. So that uptalk and the hunch combined with nodding, that definitely signals subordinate status, right? And I suppose those are appeasement gestures in some way, because if you signal that you're harmless, or you're signaling, even though you don't know it, that you're harmless, or you're signaling, even though you don't know it, that you're like a child, then you're going to present yourself as an inappropriate target of aggression or perhaps even competition. And so maybe you want that in some circumstances, but if you're attempting to market yourself as competent, that seems like a bad approach. I wonder, you know, there is this trope, which is mostly false, that women are underpaid compared to men, let's say in the same position. Now, most of that's rubbish or can be accounted for by factors other than sex. But I've always had the suspicion that some of that might be agreeableness, right? Because women are higher in agreeableness than men. And it isn't exactly obvious that the proper way to negotiate a raise, let's say, is through excess agreeableness, because what you're signaling is that you'll pretty much put up with anything because you're dependent. All those things we talked about, the uplift, the condensed body, too much nodding, too much smiling, that all indicates a state. It's signaling dependency. And that's not appropriate if you're trying to sell something, and it's not appropriate if you're trying to bargain for a raise or a promotion. It signals exactly the opposite. So, do you know of any research linking these immature styles of self-presentation to earnings? I haven't seen anything directly related to wage, but we do know that your nonverbal cues in a salary negotiation directly impact your bottom line. So, when they look at nonverbal cues, and we can say, yes, that if you're using all those appeasement signals, people are going to doubt your competence because you have too much warmth. And we know that even by watching silent videos of interviews, people can decide how competent someone is without hearing them speak, which is horrifying, right? And so, for example, I think MIT did a study on mirroring in salary negotiation. And this is an interesting one because both men and women mirror. And actually, mirroring, you could argue, I'm going to argue it, is a bit of an appeasement to get along, kind of a nonverbal cue. The more mirroring that you have in a salary negotiation, so the more that the interviewee mirrors their interviewer, the higher the outcome of the salary. And so we know that any kind of nonverbal cues or all different kinds of nonverbal cues affect that number. And so, yeah, I think that we can. While I haven't seen direct research on warmth and competence or men and women, we know that those nonverbal cues are affecting your number. Delve into mirroring a little bit. And I suppose the way I would think about it, I'll set the question up, is that when you're communicating with someone, you want to share the framework that a mutual goal provides. So you're establishing a little space where communication can take place, but it's in relationship to some mutually agreed upon end. Otherwise, you're imposing on them, which I'll have you describe, indicates that your physiological tendencies are allied with them, with theirs. It means you're going somewhere together because it's movement-oriented. But describe mirroring and suggest to people how you think it might be attended to and perfected. So mirroring is the subtle mimicking or copying mirroring of someone's cues. And actually, I take a bigger approach to mirroring, which is it's nonverbal, it can be verbal, it can also be vocal. And I like to think about it all three ways. For example, if you're with someone and mirroring showcases engagement, alignment, and I say it's nonverbal respect, you don't have to agree with what someone is saying to mirror them. You're basically following their energy. You're saying, I respect you so much that I'm going to align my verbal, vocal, and nonverbal cues to match you as a sign of respect. It's the same way where we would dress up for a formal interview or we dress more casual for a casual interview. It's the same. It's a form of nonverbal respect saying, I'm meeting you where you're at as opposed to you meeting me where I'm at. So we have three options with mirroring, and it's a very powerful tool. First, nonverbal. This is the most obvious one. So if you nod, maybe I nod, right? If you're leaning forward in your chair, maybe I lean forward in my chair a little bit more too. If you're making an eye contact pattern, there's different eye contact patterns. But if you're making an eye contact pattern where you brainstorm up here, you often see people will process complex ideas and they won't make eye contact because they actually don't want the oxytocin. They're trying to have full focus. And then at the very end of their statement, then they deliver to you. That's an eye contact pattern, and you can also use that if that feels comfortable. But there's caveats here. 1. I never want you to use a cue that feels fake or inauthentic. It will come across as fake and inauthentic. So if you can match them and that feels good to you, great. Second, it must be subtle. The worst thing that we could possibly do is like Simon says, like, they touch their face, you touch their face, your face. You cross your arms, I cross my arms. Like that would be the worst. So this is a subtle following of energy. My second favorite way to mirror, and the one that I use the most often, is vocal. Vocal is an underestimated channel that we have to communicate. And we're already doing this subconsciously. And there's some beautiful research on this. But we tend to mimic the resonance of the most powerful person in the room without realizing it. So already, we are attuned to the vocal power. So for example, you speak more slowly than I do, Jordan. I'm a fast talker. And so for our interview, I want to respect the way that you communicate and also the way that your listeners probably prefer to listen, right? So I am like,